as a result of this interaction between sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa, you now have human agency in the form of trade and commerce. And these Arab traders would now become agents for the dissemination of Islam. And as a result of their interaction with African societies south of the Sahara, through what social scientists would call the demonstration effect, because as these Arab traders traveled to sub-Saharan Africa, they became the guests of African peoples. And of course, if you look at the literature, what you see is that in the ancient African kingdoms, which had contact with the Arabs, this whole idea of two towns, what we now see very much in America, Spanish town or Chinatown, I mean, that phenomena was very much alive in ancient Ghana. And of course, in Tekrur, because what the African rulers did, they separated these foreigners from the locals. And so the Arabs would live in what they call in the Mande language, Arabuzuo, meaning Arab town, which was always about 6 to 8 kilometers away from the African towns. And some of the Polish anthropologists, archaeologists who have done some investigation into Africa in the ancient Ghana, found in the ancient capital city of ancient Ghana called Kumbisale, they found out in the ruins of Kumbisale these two townships. And what was very interesting about the differences between these two is the diet of the two inhabitants. Because in the Arab towns, they found garlic, which was rare or unknown south of the Sahara. So this proves that you did have traders who were coming from the north into this part of the northwestern part of Africa, what is now called southeastern Mauritania and northwestern part of Mali, where the ancient Ghana Empire was located. And of course, Kumbisale was the capital of the region. And you can see the diets of the Arabs who came in there as opposed to diets of the local people. And of course, this proved beyond reasonable doubt to the archaeologists that this was a site where you have this, and it reinforces this two-town arrangement phenomena, where you have one town inhabited by the traders and the other town inhabited by the locals. Now, what is very interesting here really is that when you look at the history of that transaction, you find that these Africans were practicing their own tradition, what Muslims will call, these are Jahiluns. They are practicing the religion of the Jahils, people who are really in a state of ignorance, unexposed to monotheism. And of course, the Africans on their side felt that these people were strangers who practiced a different religion. And of course, the kings and the nobles of the African side had vested interest in this trade because it brought all these luxury goods from the Mediterranean or the East, while at the same time they were exporting ivory, ostrich feathers, and other things south of the Sahara going north. And of course, so you can see that through this trade and commerce, Islam began to be exposed to the Africans through demonstration, not through proselytization, but through demonstration, because the Africans were now beginning to see the Arabs practice their religion. Now, one thing that attracted the Africans was the fact that these Arabs will stop buying and selling the moment they call the azan, the call for prayer. The moment the call for prayer was made, these Arabs will stop everything they were doing. That was one thing that struck the Africans, that these people believed their God so strongly that they will stop every human activity to go and pray. So that began to influence some of the Africans, and some of the African nobles decided to link up with the Arabs. And of course, they gradually became Muslim. That's a very interesting pattern of conversion in the African context, in the sense that the African nobility became Muslim before the masses, which is not typical, because if you look at the history of Islam and Christianity, it's always the poor people, the rejected, who will join the religion. But in this particular case, the upper classes began to gravitate towards Islam Well, some would say in retrospect out of self-interest because it gave them power of literacy, it gave them access to a civilizational center and all that. Some people have suggested this. But regardless of what was the motivation, the fact remains that through trade and commerce, Islam gradually gained ground among the African nobles. And of course, in ancient Ghana, which was still a traditional African kingdom with idols and their own way of worshipping their creator, remain a non-Muslim state. But ancient Ghana was very much influenced by these Arab traders. Now, there are some scholars who write from an African nationalist point of view who seem to suggest that in 1076, when ancient Ghana collapsed, it collapsed likely because the Arab Muslims' penetration of the region weakened the ideological foundation of the society. That's from a nationalist point of view. You used to have some African nationalists who argue along those lines. There are some African Americans, Afrocentrics, who will argue along those lines. But the evidence really suggests that ancient Ghana itself was internally decaying, like all societies and civilization. And the coming of the Muslims in that part of the world helped accelerate the process. But the Muslim presence was not necessarily the cause of the collapse of ancient Ghana in 1076.